Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So, Star Wars Insider issue 217 is out. It's not on newsstands yet, but subscribers are getting mags in their mailboxes and whatnot, and it includes Tales of Enlightenment, once again, the High Republic short stories for Phase 2. George Mann has written a tale called No Such Thing as a Bad Customer, and it's a two-parter this time. We had a two-parter to kick off the series, and then we had two one-shots. Now we've got another two-parter here happening, and it, like the previous issues, The Unusual Suspect, is also taking place during the events of the Battle of Jedha, the audio original from George Mann. Now, as with the previous story, The Unusual Suspect, that was in issue 216, there's talk in the beginning of how Keth has not been seen very much at Enlightenment recently. Keth had been the protagonist for these stories in previous issues. Last time they were talking about him helping out Morton Santeca, and this time Muna talks about how he's spending too much time with that Jedi, and he's been looking for adventure, and it's just going to bite him in the butt because he just seems to want some excitement in his life. And that Jedi we're talking about is Salandra Show, and I think we are far enough out from the release of the Battle of Jedha where I can say this is a painful situation, because we know from the Battle of Jedha that Keth does not survive those events, and so Muna talking about how, oh yeah, he's spending a little too much time with that Jedi and him wanting adventure is just gonna bite him. Oh yeah, that's kind of sad, and we're still waiting for the other shoe to drop for them to find out what's going on. And I actually talked about that a little bit with George Mann directly in the conversation that I got to have with him that we published last month. As for the story at hand, the title refers to the fact that Cradon, who is the proprietor of Enlightenment, says that everyone, regardless of who they are, is welcome in Enlightenment as long as they're not violent and they don't engage in theological discussions, which of course is very funny because Jedha is home to so many different religious sects that, like, theological discussions you'd think are bound to happen, but he doesn't want that happening in Enlightenment. Can't say I blame him, quite honestly. But that creed is put to a different kind of test when an Irem security officer and an Arano security officer find themselves in Enlightenment, and one weary comment from the Arano security officer makes the Irem security officer draw down, and Cradon smacks the blaster out of that guy's hand. So that's the end of that situation. Very well handled, Cradon. Cradon, actually. I think it's Cradon, sorry. But anyway, so there is a conversation about how difficult it is for two warring sides who don't agree on how things started and who don't agree on who has been more horrible to whom can find common ground and possibly something approaching a tenuous peace. The Irem security officer talks about how he can't be expected to forgive and forget when so many people that he loves have been killed as a result of the war, and he certainly sees the Arano folks as responsible for that. But of course, the Arano security officer has her own tale of woe to tell and her own losses to share also. And in saying sorry to the Irem officer, the Irem officer feels like, oh, she's taking the blame, and she's not. She's just saying, I'm sorry you've lost people. I've lost people too. Let's just stop losing people. And they kind of agree to agree on that until the events of the Battle of Jedha continue and the peace treaty is officially off. Irem security forces and Arano security forces are on the loose and attacking each other, and so they leave Enlightenment, where they had seemed to forge their own little peace treaty and rejoin their own individual sides of the war. I am wondering if we are going to see these two characters, though, in the second half of the story. They have gone, but the riot that's happening in Jedha City that we hear depicted in the Battle of Jedha is coming to Enlightenment's doorstep, and that is the cliffhanger where we leave things. So that, in a nutshell, is the deal with No Such Thing as a Bad Customer Part 1, which is George Mann's most recent Tale of Enlightenment from Star Wars Insider Magazine, issue 217. And that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.